Your call is very important.
Good evening and welcome to You Call That Radio TV. We are live and we're about to speak to the brilliant author Mike Watson, who has a whole host of, two books that we can recommend. Can the Left Learn to Meme? And The Memeing of Mark Fisher. I first heard the Mike, through the amazing Strange Excels podcast done by our friend Bram E. Gibbon, which I recommend you check out. And it was just a very, very interesting conversation. Since then, I've been checking out the YouTube channels and the other works that Mike's been doing. And he's live from Finland, so I think we can go live to Finland right now. Can you hear me okay, Mike?
Yes, hi. Nice to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you very much. Finland, mate. Finland. First of all, what took you to Finland?
Well, I've been working here for over a decade on art projects because I've done a lot of work in the contemporary art world as a curator and critic. And actually, that's just kind of, I say all that just to kind of like avoid going straight into the real and, in a sense, banal reason, which is that I met a girl when I was working here, or a woman, should we say, and then I moved here, and now we're together. We had a baby a year ago, and I'm still here. Well, I moved from Italy. The thing is Italy's a bit of a mess, actually, in many ways. I mean, it's a great country in terms of weather and food and whatnot, but we do have a bit of a problem. There is a bit of a problem in terms of corruption and lack of welfare provisions, etc. So we decided we'd be better off in Finland, which has, as people know, a very strong welfare state. And I mean, it's kind of a model for many left parties in the West. So yeah, we're here, and a bit of a culture shock after Italy, but on the whole, it's pretty good.
Yeah, Finland. So I suppose culture shock and just weather shock as well. Going from a warm country to a colder country.
For sure, yeah. I mean, my first winter here, it got down to -28 for a period of a few days at a time, and that's kind of rare. But most winters is getting down to -20, -25, and actually now there's still snow on the ground outside. It hasn't snowed for a few weeks, but the snow hasn't quite cleared yet, so there's still snow in my garden. And I mean, it gets up to like 7-10 degrees Celsius now, and people say, it's nice, let's have a barbecue, or people will be on the beach when it's 12°C. I think there is a beach here.
Can we talk a little bit about Finland's? What you said, that there's a lot of the way that the system works in Finland. What is it that you think that maybe the UK or anywhere else could learn from?
Well, there is just a strong welfare provision here, and there's a free education system at the tertiary level, so that is university level, and a strong healthcare system as well. Generally, just a strong state. So, things function. Also, public transport. I mean, in comparison to Italy, things function much better. I'm not somebody to really look for things that function, but after 10 years in Italy, I do appreciate that buses work. And in bigger cities, in Helsinki, the metro works as well. I'm actually very north in a city called Oulu, which has about 200,000 people. It's not a big place, but yeah, things function, things perhaps as they should be. There's a safety net, and if you don't have work, which I found myself in a position at a point here during lockdown, there is a good, a reasonable amount of money you get by on. And you can actually work. The problem with the British system, I don't know if you've ever been on welfare or on unemployment, but you're on unemployment, and if you get any type of work, you have to come off it. So if you're a freelancer, you're basically screwed. So you're thinking, do I stay on the dismal, welfare payment I'm getting, or do I come off it for £100 gig? and then had to go through the whole process of like re-enrolling in the system. So here, basically, you enroll in the system and you can earn up to, well, you can actually earn as much as you want. If you earn over a certain amount, they won't give you anything, but you can earn 1,000, 1,200 and still get some money from them. So it's almost like a universal basic income, except it's not universal. But what I mean by that is, you basically get the money even if you're working, so long as you're not full-time and earning over a certain amount. So that is very convenient.
Well, I'm lucky that I haven't had to sign on for a while. I've been able to make a very a very meagre living over the last few years of being an artist or whatever. But it's it always struck me as that it's designed to, it doesn't to not encourage people to work in so many different levels of it. And I know that it's got much worse with universal credit and things like that as well. So I can't really speak on how difficult it has been in recent times. But yeah, during lockdown, I mean, mine comes from performing gigs or organising gigs, booking festivals and stuff like that. And it was just having a Patreon on this podcast completely saved me over lockdown. So shout outs to all the patrons that supported the show. Otherwise, I would have definitely been back. And I noticed that there was a thing that happened during lockdown though for universal credit is that they gave everyone a sort of a slight pay rise, and also people that had been unemployed for before that talked about how the system was just changed completely because it was like they just made it a bit easier for everyone because so many people were unemployed, and the type of people who would write strongly worded letters and maybe cause a bit of trouble and stuff like that. Did you notice any of that, or yourself, or were you too far away to kind of notice that the difference?
I didn't really see people saying very good things from a distance, to be honest. I think. I mean, I did see this when there was some kind of, what did you call it? This payment that the Chancellor organised, and everyone was like, "Oh, what a nice Chancellor! Maybe he should be Prime Minister," because no one really understood at that point the reality of is it Sunak, Rishi Sunak. But there was this notion that perhaps perhaps the Tories were outdoing Labour as potential socialists, and it was nonsense, of course. But then Labour had a kind of call it, the media rode back on that. Is that the word? I lose my kind of colloquial English terms. They backpedaled on that, as it's been kind of clear that Sunak is part of the global elite. His wife is from a very rich Indian family, and yeah, Sunak's not out for the
working. That doesn't pay their taxes.
Exactly. Yeah. That was interesting how that happened. I reckon that Boris Johnson, actually, that his office was basically trying to get Sunak in trouble there. I'm pretty sure that the campaign to smear Sunak probably came from Number 10. I don't know, but it was strange how suddenly he was getting bad press.
Also, he was involved in the parties as well, or at least one of the parties. He's been fined for at least one, is my understanding. And yeah. I remember there was quite a weird moment when you could see when at first it seemed like Boris Johnson might be in a bit of trouble with it all. Well, he seems to just sort of ride anything out. But there was a point where Sunak was acting prime ministerial, and then when he was asked about the parties, he walked up and he left, and I think that said a lot. Can you hear me okay, man? I think you were cutting out there.
Yeah, I'm cutting out. I think I got your question. Am I back?
Why?
Anyway?
Why is it? Let me try another question. Why is it that people did believe that Sunak was some sort of nice guy, socialist for a while, and why do people also on a similar topic that's happened this week is with Elon Musk? For some reason, there's a lot of people that think he's a good guy billionaire. I mean, you don't become a billionaire by being nice.
Yeah, I don't know. I think people want to believe that. It would be nice if that was the case. I think people just very naturally, tend towards the more positive. And yeah, I don't know. I mean, Elon Musk is a mystery. I don't really know myself what he's really like, and he does manage his image very well. He seems kind of cool, to people. He's into like Dogecoin and stuff. He plays around with memes. He has a good social media. I mean, I remember Grimes, his ex partner. She said, "I'd be like first up to be part of his space colony, I wouldn't mind being a slave on, is it the moon or Mars that he's planning on colonizing? She was like, it would be an honor to be one of the first slaves.
Yeah, Mars. I think it was definitely Mars.
Mars, yeah. And then you just wonder where she gets space, but to colonize.
Yeah, so he was just breaking up there a little bit, man. Is that coming through your best internet? It's just that it's breaking up a little bit while you're talking.
Can you actually?
You're kind of sort of cutting in and out a little bit. You're cutting in and out a bit, man.
Okay, I'm back for the moment. I may have just changed my internet over.
No worries, mate. Well, if you want to change your internet over just now, and I'll just tell people what's coming up next week on You Call That Radio. We've got an amazing week next week. We've got the amazing Brown Bear, Ayrshire musician band, who's coming on to the show on Tuesday. On Wednesday night, we've got the Orwell Prize winning Darren McGarvey, who's got a new book out called The Social Distance Between Us, and what he's going to do is read out all the questions he's had on Twitter. She's going to be doing an online Q&A on Wednesday night. And then Thursday we've got Dominic Diamond, who many people of my age group will remember Games Master, the legendary TV show of the 90s. And he's done loads of radio shows and opinion pieces since then on. I think most recently he's been working with the Guardian. He's doing some stuff there. So looking forward to speak to Dominic Diamond as well, probably about football as well. He loves the Celtic. So Mike, are you back?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah,
that's better. Yeah, that seems to be better, man. So we're just talking about the Elon Musk buying Twitter. I mean, there was lots of people excited that it might change something. Would you have any optimism that could be the case? And with regards to that, just to add to the freedom of speech argument, people seem to think that Elon Musk's going to give free speech. What do you make of that?
Yeah, that's apparently his main motivation. And I'm above all dubious about that. I'm not really sure that is his main motivation. Or at least maybe there are things tied to free speech which might be beneficial to him. It has been suggested that he might actually want like free speech so that he can manipulate the stock market more easily. Because I think he definitely did manipulate Dogecoin for a while. But the free speech argument is a funny one because it sounds kind of nice, but as we know, free speech often benefits extreme right people, the extreme right wing. So, I mean, if that's what he means, if he means basically letting people say these kind of obnoxious things which are basically bigoted, then I think that would be a really bad thing.
The Dogecoin thing was a great example of that. The power that he has on that platform to just say, I think the background to that is that I think it was Ether, not Bitcoin, the other one. Sorry, I'm not a crypto expert, but it was the Ether coin or whatever it was, Ethereum. So he took Ethereum away from Tesla and then says Dogecoin's going to the moon, and then he made which was a kind of sort of joke meme coin into making himself a lot of money.
Yeah, that was Dogecoin. Yeah. He definitely manipulated it. Yeah, I think that there was this thing when he was appearing on Saturday Night Live, and there was a big kind of speculation about whether he had mentioned Dogecoin, and that would make the coin rocket whilst he was on the program because it's live. So in that case, people were thinking of buying as he mentioned Doge live, and it doesn't really work like that. What happens is the smart people, they all buy just before that happens because you think you get a pump and dump. So when someone like him mentions Dogecoin in the media, the really wealthy people have already bought it just before and then start dumping at that point. So it basically screws all the little people. Basically, a lot of people made a lot of money out of his him mentioning Dogecoins at certain strategic points. But they tended to be what you call the whales, the big investors who kind of understand how this works. Yeah,
and so obviously with him, yeah, I mean, like it seems to be that it's mostly the right wing that are celebrating the free speech, and I mean, it was what do you call him? Piers Morgan's got a new show out, and the intro to it's absolutely ridiculous. is talking about, snowflake society. And I mean, could there be any more snowflake than storming off a show and just generally being offended by everything that he reads on Twitter? Because it seems to be there's definitely a thing that happens where, whether it's true or not, or one person has a very extremist view on the left, then that'll be the narrative of the day for people at Piers, for all your kind of morning TV talk show type things, where people argue about. And to me, that seems like snowflake culture as well. People being upset by someone having a different opinion, especially someone who is of no, has got like 120 Twitter followers and says something, and they'll just run with that as if the left has gone completely mad.
Yeah, I mean, I think it allows him to set the agenda. I'm not really clear what his politics are. I would have taken him to be, well, I guess he's just very, very, how do you call it? I mean, he does whatever benefits him. But yeah, I wouldn't have thought he would be Republican, because they're just so uncool. And he seems to court a kind of more cosmopolitan kind of vibe. I don't know that he's really in it to push Trumpism, but I think that's just a side effect. I think what he's in it to do is to possibly push himself, and he's thinking of the long term. I think he's thinking way beyond the next election in the US. I think he's thinking about his own legacy. I think certain things that him running Twitter will enable him to do that he otherwise possibly couldn't do it, and maybe there'll be a presidential run in the next sort of 10 or 15 years.
Do you think that it's going to happen?
I don't know. I think it depends on just how much trouble he's in legally, how many cases he has. I don't know if he has like multiple cases, but most rich people do. This is what leads them to go into politics. That's what happened with Berlusconi, and definitely with Trump, because you get immunity whilst you're president.
And it seems to be the case that he's got immunity after you're president as well, because it seems like nobody really wants to lock up a former president, because that obviously affects the standing of the United States going into other people's countries, spreading democracy for oil.
For sure. I mean, I think Musk would like to be the most powerful person in the world, and if he needs a presidency to do that, he'd do that. But if he doesn't need a presidency to do it, he won't, because I think anyone in that position, if they don't need a presidency, they won't go for it, because it's just a pain generally. I think there's probably a lot of people more powerful than the US president who don't go near politics in banking and things. So I'm not sure. I think he wants to have a huge legacy, and he wants to colonize Mars and whatnot. And I think Twitter is part of that wider plan. I don't think Tesla is enough for him.
And can we just go back to your story, Mike, about how did you get involved in? I mean, from what I've heard from your other podcasts and stuff, is this you're coming from a more kind of art background? What led you to that, and what led you to moving into writing novels?
Yeah, I mean, it's a funny question. I mean, I got into art when I was like 5 years old, but I won't go into that. But I was thinking, like, what would I study when I went to uni when I was like 18, 19, and I had these choices of like history, politics, art, and I was very, very critical already. And I just saw something in art. I thought, there's potential in art. Somehow it's like the missing link. And I didn't really know much, but I went and studied art, and then I got very into the Frankfurt School, which is basically a school of philosophers from Germany, like Theodor Adorno, Walter Benjamin, Herbert Marcuse. And basically what they say is exactly that art is like the missing part of Marxism, because Marx basically talks about the economy and not culture. And they argue that, that culture is somehow intrinsic to the revolution, particularly the media. They talk about the mass media. Obviously, mass media, this is why Musk wants Twitter. Mass media governs or guides how people vote. So it's very important in democracy, but also is important in fascist and other totalitarian states. So yeah, I just got more and more into that, and somehow I ended up going through the whole education system, did my doctorate whilst I was in Italy, and ended up writing for big magazines, because I just thought, big art magazines. So I just thought, look, I need a way to start publishing somewhere, and it just seemed an easy way in that I could write about art exhibitions and things. So I started writing for Freeze magazine and Art Review, Art Forum. So they're basically the biggest three art magazines in the world. And it was just very interesting because I saw from the inside how the art world is just very, very tied in with finance. I ended up also organizing a lot of art shows, but I saw the same thing. I just found that basically in Italy, where I was organizing shows at the Venice Biennale, which is a huge biannual art event, and some of the state museums and big galleries, I just found that absolutely everyone in the art world was upper bourgeois or aristocratic. And I was getting invited to all these roof parties, these terrace parties in Rome, where I lived. And also traveling, I was going to Milan. I was getting invited to all these collectors' houses, these art collectors' houses, and kind of after parties for these exhibitions. And I just sort of noticed everyone was much wealthier than me. And I kind of accidentally ended up there because I wrote for these magazines. So they kind of welcomed me in because I could basically give publicity to the artworks that they owned or that they bought. So they welcomed me into the kind of fold. But just imagine I was as wealthy as them. So there'd be these questions like, there'd be all these embarrassing situations. Like they'd say, oh, do you want to come to this restaurant? And I'd be like, oh, I don't know, I don't really have any money. And they'd be like, oh, we can go to the cash point. And I'd be like, no, I don't have any money. or they'd be like, we're inviting you to this restaurant. And I'd be like, oh, okay, thanks. And I'd be like, I don't have any money. And they'd be like, no, we're inviting you. There's a whole language with the wealthy. When they say we're inviting, they mean we're paying. But I get in all these kind of funny situations. They just think I'm a lunatic. Because I just be like, no, I don't have any money. But they'd be like, no, but we're inviting you. And I'm like, because I didn't want to be there, like not being able to pay my bill. So, aside from that, there were many other like weird situations. But this thing happened where I'd start to say to people like, have you noticed that everyone here is an aristocrat? I'd say it to like Italian artists and things, and they'd be like, yeah, it's really bad. And then I'd go like the next day and I'd say like to someone, I'd say like my friend Simone, I spoke to Gianpaolo yesterday, and I told him, have you noticed that everyone's an aristocrat? And then Simone would say, yeah, but he's also an aristocrat. So I'd be saying to aristocrats like, have you noticed everyone's an aristocrat around here? So yeah, it was awkward, and it was an education in the art world, which is very, very class based still.
And why do you think that is? I mean, most of my experience is more from the music side of things, which is obviously got the same problem, although I wouldn't say it as extreme. But I mean, in music, it seems to be down to the fact that there's less, if you're living in a scheme or an estate, as you'd probably call it. There's less opportunities to play instruments. The level of teachings for the music departments have less budgets, and you've got the fact that you can't just buy a guitar or anything like that. What's the main reasons do you think that art has got so many class issues?
Well, there is an issue with materials, that it's difficult to maybe afford to make art, but not just because of the cost of materials, but just because it doesn't really pay, for a lot of people, it doesn't really pay. So to afford that lifestyle, you need to have money from your family, basically. You need kind of old money in your lineage. So there is that. And I think there's just still a very kind of antiquated idea that people should make art for the love of art. People should want to engage in art for the love of art. So this kind of keeps out poor people. It's considered that it's kind of uncouth to be thinking about the money. This is kind of discouraged that you should be talking about money in art circles, apart from like the rich people who get to talk about it all the time and get to like make money by selling artworks, by buying and selling artworks. But the whole of the kind of all of the stratas below the top, they're supposed to just kind of do their work for the love of the field, the cultural field. So there's still that mentality very much, which obviously excludes poor people. But aside from that, just think that, I mean, John Berger, you must know John Berger, or maybe you know John Berger. He made this TV series called Ways of Seeing. It was on the BBC in the 1970s, and there's also a book called Ways of Seeing. It was basically just one of the best things that's ever been on mainstream TV in the UK. He talked in each episode about how art links to power, And it happened actually. It came out like a week before. Oh no, now I forget. Hang on, it was 1972, 73. What was it? Was it the 4-day week or the? I'm pretty sure it was. But anyway, it came at a moment of turmoil in Britain and a moment of intense pressure on the working classes. And in it, he said, there's one line. He said that the art of any epoch serves to further the interest of the ruling class. So I think that's, you have it there. That the whole point of culture is to push the story that the ruling class want you to hear, and that counts also for the media, obviously. And in that case, the people running the art scene or the media or the music scene are going to favor middle class people. Basically, it's the ruling elite paying the middle class to further the interests of the ruling elite and the middle class. And if you get working class people thrown into the mix, they're very awkward and embarrassing for the system, because they start to say things like, how did you get here? I had to work my way up, and immediately it's almost like saying, well, you got your job because of your family, or you got your job because of your social class. So just the presence of working class people embarrasses everyone around them. And of course, they may also try and push class politics. The only way class politics is really allowed in the art world is when is basically as a form of whitewashing, or it's actually called art washing. You do get left-wing political views in the art world, but it's just to make the art world look good. And actually, wealthy people are very keen to buy up left-wing messaging, but it has to be kind of clean, it has to be toothless.
I suppose another thing is as well is that you've got, in order to get very good at anything, what's the old saying, like, you've got to do your 10,000 hours or whatever it is. And if you're trying to hold down a job and an education and a family life, a social life, and all of that stuff is without having the freedom to not work and work in your craft, the odds are stacked against you. And then I suppose you've got the others, the contacts of knowing people, like you just pointed out there. Someone's getting an exhibition somewhere good because they know the people, or maybe they've got a parent, a rich parent, or a parent who was involved in that world before them.
For sure, yeah.
Nepotism, a sort of nepotism thing going on.
That's definitely the case. Yeah. That's the whole thing with the aristocracy and upper bourgeois running the art world in some countries. I would actually say very much in the UK as well. But aside from this, yeah, I mean, the pressure that someone is under if they're poor and in the art world means that they immediately kind of, or not immediately. So I mean, I think that a working class person in the art world can hold their own, and they can actually emulate the mannerisms of the middle class for a while. But at some point, it's going to unravel as they get under more and more pressure. And that's where they start to act very honestly, abrasively towards the people around them. And again, it's embarrassing, and it shows the situation for what it is. So I just think that, yeah, a working class person can just make art. They can just put their whole life into their art, but they're not going to have the airs and graces of the middle class. They upset the whole image somehow, because they're going to be given the pressure on them. They're physically going to be displaying something other than the just very kind of pleasant kind of bearing that the middle class have or are supposed to have, and the people get taught to have when they go to elite schools.
I found it interesting that the podcast you were on, I actually was going to give a wee shout out to your YouTube channel as well for anyone tuning in. Theory Wave Nights, is that right?
Yeah, just to say about that, Theory Wave Nights is a channel I used to run, and I've basically taken it back. I didn't do anything on it for a while because I was running what's called the Acid Left with Adam Ray Adkins. We made a lot of content on there about art, culture, and politics. And I'm basically doing the same thing, but on my own now on Theory Wave Nights. I do run one podcast on that channel with a painter called Bobby Dowler, who's a working class artist who's British. He lives in Paris, and we basically the podcast is called Down and Out in the Art World, and it's about being poor in the art world. So it covers a lot of these themes.
Yeah, it's brilliant. Check it out, guys. As I said, I put the link in the comments. If you're watching it, you should be able to hit that link and just hit the big red subscribe button. But there's some really interesting stuff on that. The one I just listened to last night was with regards to the excess of art, and it was just interesting because obviously I've got a few friends who do exhibitions and stuff, and I've been to a few, not many, but yeah, it was just interesting to hear the point of view of being a poor artist and maybe going there for the free drink and stuff like that, and how alcohol and substance abuse sort of feeds into the art world. So could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, private views often have free drink, and that is to kind of relax the collectors partly, but also just to get the punters in. I mean, in Hackney in London a few years back, this was very visible actually. There's two things happening. There's a free drink to relax the art collectors, but a lot of that happens like away from the public. And then there's a very public openings, and then you get free drink as well, but it's like Beck's beer or something. Beck's do big sponsorships for exhibitions, or they certainly did then. And we kind of talked on this recent episode about why that might be. And of course, there's not much reason to maybe get like the poor artists and other kind of, lowly people in the art world drunk at your exhibition openings. But what happened in Hackney at that time is you got loads and loads of people coming to these exhibition openings knowing that there was free beer, and just, there for the good times. It was basically almost a party. And, bringing all those people there to East London, it made it more popular as a place, and actually led, amongst other things happening in Hackney then, Hackney and Bethnal Green and this whole kind of part of East London, it led to a rise in house prices. So basically the art world was instrumental in gentrification. So by having this kind of party scene, free drink, whatever, having this situation which was quite lowly, it was almost a carnivalesque situation. It was like a party for the poor artists, as well as the parties that were going on for the richer people, which would have been behind closed doors. Having this actually led to a situation where you benefited the elite and you raised local property prices, and then you ended up very much changing the geography, or the or at least the how would you call it, demographics in Hackney and Bethnal Green. So there are these kind of motivations, and then I don't know. I guess everyone just likes to have a good party. I mean, there's an element of that, but I also think that there's another aspect that, I mean, there is the whole thing, the middle class. There is a kind of jet-setting middle class that have a kind of international, almost swingers club, but whilst also getting drunk and doing cocaine all around the world. There is this aspect for sure. This goes on, and this revolves around events like the Venice Biennale, this biannual event in Venice, where you get like different countries having like national pavilions where they showcase their art, and you get other kind of art exhibitions on the periphery. But you get an opening of 3 days there every 2 years, opening event, where you just get collectors, critics, artists. They just go there and they get hammered. And you always have what's his name? I always forget his name. The guy who did own Chelsea, Abramovich. He always has his yacht out there. I think this year probably didn't have his yacht there because it might have been impounded, but I'm not sure about Abramovich. And now if his stuff was impounded in the end, because I think Ukraine asked if he wouldn't be penalised because he was helping them with negotiations. But anyway, I'm pretty sure his yacht wasn't there anyway for the pressure he's under generally. But you'd have people like Abramovich with their yachts there, and you'd have like everyone from him, down. And what happens at the Venice Biennale is the opening, like you got a 3-day exclusive opening for collectors and critics and whatever, but there's an opening before the opening of the really super rich people. And so you have the opening before the opening, and those super rich people, they basically bail out of Venice, within a day. Then you have like a progression where, the collectors come, they see the works they like, they do their talks, they kind of basically arrange to buy something, although it's not actually a sales event. And then you get like towards the end of the event, you just get the last artist hanging on. So over a 3-day arc, you have like the very elegant people. And then as it kind of goes through the 3 days, you get to a point where you just have a few stragglers there who are treating it like it's Glastonbury Festival or Woodstock or something, which is an interesting thing. It's almost like Hogarth. Is it Hogarth, the gin drinkers? anyway, there was this gin epidemic in London, and there's a famous painting of famous print of this gin epidemic, and it kind of feels like that at the end of the Venice Biennale opening. But anyway, I mean, there's a kind of different stratas from the parties for the elite who just all they do is party, down to the drinking that goes on amongst the lowlier workers, which is more a case of survival. And which is quite damaging. And I think it's partly because there's low wages in the art world, and so you've got low wages, but it's like, well, hang out and you'll get some free drinks, and you then have the artists. You then have the artists, even the ones who are doing well, and I could say actually particularly the ones who are doing well, who get on a kind of treadmill. They're basically paraded around the art world in different countries, especially there's a certain point when an artist is suddenly worth a lot of money, and it's people are banking on not only that they're worth a lot of money, but that their value is going to increase. It's going to double, treble over the next year, and then basically the whole art world is running on collectors trying to find the artist that is selling for 1,000 today, who's going to be selling for 10,000 in 6 months, who's going to be selling for 100,000 in a year. And when an artist is rising up like that, and there's actually websites, there's one called, and you have to say this carefully, it's called Art Rank. It's a ranking site of artists, and it's basically like a stock market style thing. And you have like little columns of artists that are selling for 10,000, artists selling for 20,000. You have like maybe arrows next to them that point if they're going to be going up or down. And collectors are aiming to get an artist cheap who's going to rise in value. Now, when they start rising in value, you've got to parade that artist around at private views, because that helps sell their works, especially if they have a good backstory. And that artist basically is going to get exhausted doing that. And two things happen. One is they get exhausted. Two, they can't make work anymore, because they're constantly being taken to parties to try and sell their work. So anyway, to survive this kind of almost like rock star lifestyle, so this from, you said you make music, they have to turn to drink and drugs. So one collector told me, he came to me at a private view. He's a big, no, sorry, not collector, gallerist, a big gallerist. He's broken some of the biggest artists in the world. I mean, in the sense that he's made them big. He basically said to me, he was like looking a bit annoyed. He said, look, I got up at 4 a.m. yesterday. He said, so this was like a lunchtime press preview, actually a press conference thing. I was there as press. It was a show in Milan. He said he was looking perplexed, and he said, well, actually more annoyed than perplexed. He said, look, I got up at 4 a.m. yesterday, and all my artists were still in the hotel bar. He said, now they're not here. He said, there's no one at the opening. None of my artists are here to talk to the press. And he said, it always happens. He says, once these artists start to get big, then they spend the whole time drinking and doing cocaine. He said, I'm looking for an artist now. I'm looking for some new artists for my list, my gallery list of artists I represent. But he said, I'm looking for non-drinkers, artists without drug problems. He said they're a fucking nightmare. But he said when you see an artist who's like, he's got one painting in blue, it's like this size, and he goes, he's got one size of your sofa in pink, but they're basically the same, and he's got one in yellow, and he's got one that will go on the ceiling, and he said, but they're all basically the same painting. He says what's happened is that the artist has been burnt out, and they can't make any art. They're just making the same thing again and again to sell, because there's so much demand, but they can't put any real effort in because they're constantly traveling or whatever. And then he says, and then they use the drugs, and then they get even worse. But the thing is, I mean, what wasn't said by him is that he clearly was part of that process, because he was a gallerist pushing the artists. But anyway, what we wanted to get to in the podcast there when we were talking about this is the need for particularly poorer artists to step back from this and to look after themselves a bit, because your gallerists won't ever say to you, I think it's pretty rare that your gallerists will say to you, whoa there, maybe slow down on the drinking, slow down on the drugs. No one's really going to say that to you. So we were just kind of saying that, you need to kind of look out for yourself.
Yeah, I think you made a good point that you can't. That was another point that kind of ties into what we were talking about earlier as well. Is that if you can't afford rehab, then it's a different game completely.
That's the thing. Yeah.
But yeah, I've got a question here from hello Ali, hello Kirsten. How he's doing, guys? Tam is in the house. Janet, Johnny, and James. Yeah, it was a 4-day week, and Johnny Cypher says Ways of Seeing is brilliant. I don't think I've seen that yet, so I've actually just added that to my watch later list. I think it's on YouTube to check out for free, so I'm going to check that out. Johnny's also asked, would love to hear some of your personal recommendations of art that isn't toothless to check out, Mike.
Yeah, now you present a problem for me. Art isn't toothless. I mean, I'd say that there's a lot happening with artists based in Russia, Russian artists now, who are against the regime. So look at Что делать, which is basically means what is to be done, which is the name of a book by Lenin as well. And they've been for a long time making political works there, and they have been very involved in the kind of protests you saw in St. Petersburg at the beginning of the war, when people were being carted off in police vans. People like that, definitely. There's an artist who's very interesting working right now called Bita Ratzavi, who's just she has an exhibition in the Venice Biennale, because the Venice Biennale just opened last week for this year, and she does a lot of work around art and power. And she actually made a situation where you have this pavilion there, which is a national pavilion of Estonia, because, as I said earlier, the presentations there are divided by country. And she was part of the Estonian pavilion, although she's actually from Iranian origins, but she lives in Estonia and Finland. And she made a situation where you basically have guards on the doors, and as you go in, they say to you, "Oh no, sir, you have to use this entrance or that entrance." And you might go in as a couple, and they might say, they might make one part of the couple going through one entrance and one go through the other entrance. And basically, if you're going through one entrance, you get like a view from an elevated platform. But the thing is, once you're on the platform, that's as far as you get. You're kind of stuck. But if you go through the other entrance, you don't get onto the elevated platform, but you actually get to see more. And the thing is that, on the entrance through which you go and you end up on the elevated platform is like it's the kind of bougie entrance. It's kind of the entrance for the rich people. But this is a kind of notion. Whereas the other entrance is the entrance for the poor people. But the rich people, they get their kind of platform, but they actually miss half of the exhibition. They actually have half the view cut off because of their elevated vista viewpoint. So it's kind of making the point that you have these different social classes, but actually there isn't necessarily a benefit, or it's not only a benefit to being rich. Yet the rich actually often miss a lot of life's experiences.
It's interesting. You mentioned Russia there as well. We're talking off air just beforehand, because obviously you're in Finland, so you're nearer, and you're just saying there's some differences in the way that the media's portraying the war over here than compared to Finland. So it'd be great to hear your viewpoint on what's happening and how the media of Finland are reacting to what's going on in Ukraine.
Yeah, for sure. I can talk about the media reaction. I have actually been a bit critical of the online left podcasters and meme makers and people on Twitter talking about the war when they're often quite ignorant. Actually, not many people have tried to give platforms to Russians or Ukrainians, so I got a bit frustrated with people I often work with online, just with the way they speculated wildly on the war, certainly more in the when it first started, and a lot of them supporting Russia or not condemning not condemning Russia enough and not supporting Ukraine enough. Anyway, so I don't want to go too much into the war because I'd rather Russians and Ukrainians speak about it. But my perspective from Finland is that look, I mean, we have a massive border with Russia here. And this notion of joining NATO potentially puts Finland at threat, directly from Russia, even though they're not. I don't think they're in any position to invade at this point. But at the same time, the dialogue in the media is much calmer than in the UK and the US, and I think this is partly a cultural thing. But I think aside from the cultural thing in the sense of people are just they're more stoical here, shall we say. I think that there's a tendency in the UK and US more than here to try to scare its citizens and subjects. I really think it really reminds me of a few things. It reminds me of the terrorist threat a few years ago, but also of the Cold War, which I vaguely remember because I'm Generation X. I was born in 1979, so I do have that kind of thing going back to when I was like 8-10 years old of like we could all end up being nuked, which actually kind of persisted to some degree through the 90s. And the talk in the UK and the US reminds me of that. And I think it's handy to have a public that are scared. I think that's very much what's going on here, where the public have every reason to be scared. The media don't push that kind of story in that way. By that I mean they don't push. They're not trying to terrify the public more than they need to be.
Could we go talk a little bit about the book? So I've heard you talk about the memeing of Mark Fisher on the brilliant Strange Exiles podcast. Could you just give us a little bit of backstory about the book? And so it's a long title. So it's the memeing of Mark Fisher: How the Frankfurt School foresaw capitalist realism and what to do about it.
Yeah,
could you just talk a little bit what
well, the title will probably be shortened when it gets its second edition, actually. I want to shorten it to The Memeing of Mark Fisher, How the Frankfurt School Foresaw Capitalist Realism. And the cover is here. It's getting a second edition, probably with another publisher soon, but we'll be talking about that when it happens, or when we're ready to announce it. The book was written in lockdown, or in that strange period when you kept kind of reading that lockdown had been relaxed and then it hadn't been relaxed. It happened in Finland as well, like that. It's like you didn't know if you're in lockdown anymore or what, or what restrictions were applied. You just generally ended up staying in. You end up being habituated to staying in and not mixing too much with people, also for the continued fear of getting COVID. I basically endured lockdown in Finland, and it wasn't very easy. I think like a lot of people, I found it difficult. I really got through it doing this kind of thing, being on people's podcasts and doing my own podcast and just making a whole network of friends internationally. And I think that's a very positive thing. And that's a very positive thing about the internet. But what the book talks about is like basically how the lockdown exacerbated difficult, an already difficult situation for poor people. I don't think lockdown was so difficult if people, for very wealthy people, but it also, what it did is it basically made everyone poor in the sense that everyone suddenly couldn't go anywhere or do anything. But my feeling, as that kind of tailed off, was that there's going to come a point when suddenly, the world reopens and people can do stuff again, but the poor are still going to be in their houses or between their houses and the supermarket with, what little money they have. So I talked about that, but also how we were leading an increasingly online life and how that does have its positive aspects, but also its negative aspects. And it is a situation that would leave the poor better off, so that coming out of lockdown, the poor would still be poor, but they'd be, largely under the thumb of the elite, but via the internet. So staying in their houses, maybe getting to explore, anti-capitalist and socialist ideas, but through the internet. So, somehow the situation had been numbed or placated or made toothless. I kind of talked about that and speculated on the possibility that we could maybe foster a counter-capitalist, anti-capitalist, socialist type movement, but it would have to come through the internet, and it would have to come through meme makers and podcasters telling people to get onto the streets. So it basically says all that, and it hasn't really manifested, but I think it still could. And what it talks about is also how meme culture. There's a whole kind of there was an explosion really before then, coming on the wave of like Occupy a bit later than that, the Occupy movement. But there's been like a really kind of big growth in socialism amongst the young, coming via the internet, via Instagram, via YouTube, Twitch, etc. And that's a great thing. But it talks about how at the same time, it represents a co-optation of the left. So you have this, this communication of what it means to be socialist, but at the same time, it's a communication that happens via Google, via Facebook, and basically anything we do online immediately feeds into algorithms and the data economy. So it talks about that in relation specifically to Mark Fisher, so the figure mentioned on the cover. So the thing is, Mark Fisher took his life tragically in 2017, but had written brilliantly about how capitalism tends to co-opt counterculture. And the thing is, he has become a meme. So he's become hugely popular, partly because he is a meme, but at the same time, him being a meme belittles perhaps what he's saying. So there are all these contradictions, and the book talks about whether or not we should be just very dismissive of meme culture, or whether we can use it to launch a street movement. And in that, it talks about the Bernie Sanders campaign and the Corbyn campaign, and the way Momentum and the Sanders campaign basically use the internet to get people canvassing on the streets. And it says we could do that, but outside electoral politics. So I think the problem with the Sanders and Corbyn movement is that they're tied to electoralism. But why can't the internet constantly to get people doing stuff outside? So that was basically what the book said.
With regards, I actually spoke to Bram about this as a result of, I think it was of him reading your book and speaking to you. He did a great article for us called "The Memeing of Boris Johnson." And I was wondering what your thoughts are, personally, on memes that slag Boris or Donald Trump. Does that feed into their profile and make them more likely to be elected?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Well, memes that slag them off, I don't know exactly. I know that negative. How can you say it? Negative attention, negative publicity tends to have the opposite effect to that intended. And yeah, I think. Well, actually, yeah. Now I get your question more. I get how it fits into what I wrote the book about. Basically, yeah, I think anything inherently conflictual is going to play back into the system. And I think at root, the problem we have, and I talk about Adorno here in the book, Theodore Adorno of the Frankfurt School, who was writing up until the late 60s. He basically says that the fundamental problem we have as humans is that we tend to try and categorize things. In fact, we can't do anything but categorize and identify things and name things. And in so doing, we create immediate conflicts. So we categorize nature to better understand it so we can live longer and safer lives. And by categorizing nature, we kind of fence it in. And that's kind of the root of capitalism and the root of exploitation. And what Adorno says is basically when you make art that, says, fuck Thatcher, for example, to give an old example, but when you make art that is directly political against something, you just feed back into this mechanism of categorization, identification, and conflict. And what he says is that abstract art is actually a more powerful way of us getting beyond this system of identifying stuff, because abstract art by definition is something that you can't identify. You can't say that painting is of a tree. So instead you look at the painting, you get kind of momentarily lost, and in that moment of being lost, you kind of step out of the daily conflict. So I would say, yeah, what we need is memes that, rather than feeding back into petty political squabbles, actually get us thinking beyond conflict and beyond the idea of basically us and them. So it's a big task. But what Mark Fisher did, he basically left us the introduction to a book called Acid Communism. Or let's just say that, given the fact that he took his life, we are left with this introduction to a book called Acid Communism, where he speaks about basically this, this phenomenon of, let's say, to simplify it greatly, he doesn't say exactly this, but of losing one's edges that you get through listening to certain types of music, through, for example, doing psychedelics. But he doesn't say one has to do psychedelics at all. I'm not saying that at all. But, he says that in the 60s, 70s, you had basically a psychedelic mainstream. You had crazy stuff on TV that was very ambiguous creatively. He talks about this TV series called Sapphire and Steel, which some people might remember. But also Doctor Who was really far out back then. He didn't talk about Monty Python, I don't think, but let's say Monty Python was pretty off the wall. I mean, you had this stuff that, it wasn't it wasn't feeding into, it wasn't making clear statements. And you had this in music on the radio as well. You know, the Beatles were psychedelic, Pink Floyd were. And he basically says he said in that introduction, we need a new countercultural movement which promotes this kind of blurring of the edges. And I think he's totally right, and I think it's doable. But of course, you know, if we did it on any scale, people would demonize us. But you know, we can at least try. And I think, you know, you can use systems like Momentum had in the election and the Sanders campaign, but basically they had a big interface which you could log on to, and it would say, like, we need canvassers in East London today. We need people to make memes about the health service today. You know, we could have this happening within the online left. So rather than just talking and increasing our own visibility online so we could sell more books or whatever we do, you know, we could actually be using this to coordinate people. We'd have simultaneous protests in different countries, etc. So that's what the book suggests. And I still think we could do that.
Have you got an example of a meme that you think worked well, or that you've seen?
I tend to think they really don't work very well, and that's what I say in the book. Or I say that there's potential there. I think where they get people thinking about Fisher, or thinking about socialism, or thinking about Marx or whatever, I mean, that's good. And you get a lot of quote memes where you just have, like, maybe the head of Fisher and then a quote from one of his books. But on the whole, there's a real kind of negative nihilist vibe on the internet lately. And you get a situation I talked about in the book where I actually had a account follow me that was a QAnon account. And I thought, this is weird. Why is a QAnon account following me? And it was only following about 200 people. And it had, like, I don't know, 20,000, 40,000 followers. And the closer I looked, I could see it was a parody account. But it had a lot of right-wing people liking, you know, the different posts there, the different memes there. And I think this is a problem, that you have such an ambiguity. It's very hard to spread a kind of positive message. I'm kind of trying myself at the moment. I have an Insta account, which I think maybe you brought up the address here.
Yes, I do that. I'll put that in the comments for everyone.
And basically, I'm making these kind of chart memes when you'd have like a statement, and I can look at what I've done recently. You could have, like, you have this grid, and you have at the top, you have some kind of statement, and then, you know, you have a statement like, I'm just making really stupid ones, because this is where I'm trying to bring in the abstraction. Like, here's ABBA on the radio, you know, ABBA the band. That's the there you are. Yeah, so you could bring that one. Here's ABBA on the radio. So you have, like, and obviously this is really stupid stuff, but you have then taps their foot. So you have Kant, Marx, Fisher, and Zizek tapping their foot. Then you have, like, immediately changes to metal, and you have Nietzsche. Then you have just a picture of ABBA. Then you have, like, it's actually Walter Benjamin, Sontag, Judith Butler, and Rick Roderick, all philosophers, and they're emulating the kind of pose of ABBA there. And then you go on and you say, on LSD has a spiritual moment. So that's Foucault. So he listens to ABBA and then has a spiritual moment. Then you have, oh God, turn it off. It's Hegel and Sartre. Then you have, like, oh God, turn it off. And then it says in brackets, and actually they listen at home instead. And you have, like, Nick Land, who's kind of far right philosopher, he turned far right, Jack Lacan and Freud. Then you have Pulse the Cops, and it's Theodore Adorno. And the thing is, you know, people get really into this and they start to debate, and they say to me, why did you put so-and-so here? And I'm like, you know, can you imagine that I really thought about this a lot? Like, I'm more just trying to get a conversation going. But people get upset about, you know, why I put certain people in certain places. And then you get a debate going. And I say, you know, people say, oh, you know, why do you always say bad stuff about Adorno? Because I tend to put Adorno as calls the cops. Whatever I put there, it's always... it's always the case that Adorno ends up calling the cops, but sometimes it makes sense, and sometimes it's a bit random. But Adorno called the cops on his students in 1969. They occupied his faculty, and actually it was run by a student called Hans-Jürgen Krahl, who was one of his PhD students. He actually called the cops on his own PhD student for occupying the faculty. And I really like Adorno a lot, but it's one of the problems. He's problematic for a few different reasons. One, he hates jazz, and that often comes up for criticism. He's just very bourgeois in general. Like when he says the kind of abstract music, the abstract art or music that one should experience this kind of blurring of one's edges with. He doesn't talk about like Stockhausen. I mean, bear in mind that he lived until 1969, but he could therefore have talked about a number of like hippie bands. He doesn't talk about any of that. He talks about Schoenberg and Gustav Mahler, classical musicians. So there is this issue of elitism with Adorno, but also very hard to get around. I kind of talk my way around the elitism in the book there, but it's very hard to excuse him calling the cops on his students. So I always kind of mention that, and that gets debates going. But the memes themselves are making it absolutely ridiculous. They're kind of stupid. But
could you talk us through the when there's no toilet roll one as well, please?
Yeah, exactly. So this is where they're completely stupid, and some people obviously get pissed off at me. But it just says where there's no toilet roll, and you have would not be in that situation. Kant, Judith Butler, and Foucault, and then you have Waddles out looking for more paper. You have Rick Roderick, Zizek, and Walter Benjamin. Then you have this one shouts Engels, which is Marx, because he's always getting Engels to bail him out of situations. And then you have uses hands, and that's Nietzsche and Hegel. Baking paper is Nick Land. I always put him in some awful situation because I don't like his philosophy. And then calls the cops is Adorno, and Sontag's just got stuck there. She doesn't really deserve to be there. But you have Adorno calls the cops because he has no loo roll. And then somebody says, why don't you like Adorno in that one? In the comment, and I'm like, they're like, why Adorno? I'm like, why are you saying why Adorno? That's the only one that makes any sense there. I mean, why don't you say why he uses his hands for Nietzsche? Someone got incensed because I said why Adorno, why someone got incensed asking why did Adorno call the cops, and I'm like, why weren't you incensed that Nietzsche uses his hand to wipe his ass? But you do get all these situations. But then I got to explain why I mentioned Adorno calling the cops. I got to explain basically that Adorno called the police on his students. So these memes get me to go into philosophical situations in the comments. It basically gets these chats going in the comments. So that's the kind of thing that possibly could work, but I'm just trying that out at the moment. I mean, I think we need to use different strategies. I think ultimately we need a genuine abstraction, like, Pink Floyd, but in memes, or, Jackson Pollock or Rothko, but in memes. And it's yet to be seen how that can work, because people tend to look at memes for, 2 or 3 seconds? It's probably less than that. It's probably a split second that people look at the average meme, and they even take it in that short time. And abstraction works in the way I described earlier, because you take the time to get lost in it, and then you forget, all the processes of identification that you engage in the day. Like when you say, this is this is that, I like this, I don't like that, I have to go to work in an hour, blah blah blah. All of these things, you forget them because you there's a process of time involved where you drift away. And I can't see at the moment how you can do that with memes unless you can get people somehow drawn in. And of course, you can do that with YouTube. We used to make on the Acid Left, a little bit on the old Zero Books channel, these pieces of music where Adam Ray Adkins, my host of the Acid Left when I was still with the Acid Left YouTube, he would make music tracks where he would he would record dialogue from like Mark Fisher, Zizek. He would record them basically talking, and he would put that over this dance music track that he made. He basically mixed it into a track. I would then make a live VJ set in, say, Twitch. So, VJing is when you have live visuals going along with music. And so we would have like live visuals of these philosophers, but you'd have kind of abstract, trippy backgrounds as well. And people really like that. And I think that definitely has potential if you can get people engaging in that way.
Absolutely, man. I'm loving a lot of the stuff I've been watching that you've been doing with the Acid Left, and on your own channel as well, which I've put in the comments, which is Theory Wave Nights, and Acid Left is both on it. We've got I've put your Twitter in the comments as well, and the Instagram page if you want to see more of those memes, which are class. Is there anything? What was just like sort of for instance, is there any other podcasts or books or audio books that you recommend people should check out?
Well, actually, there's a new channel, Sublation, which is basically Doug Lane's new channel. Doug Lane was with Zero Books, and then Zero Books got sold. And now Doug Lane's at Sublation, and he's not only got a media channel, YouTube channel, and podcasts, etc. He's starting a new publisher, and he's actually starting a new magazine. May the 1st, he's launched the Sublation Press magazine, which is where it'll be worth looking out for. Apart from him, of course, Bram, our friend, he does brilliant things. Bram Arnold. Now you're getting me stuck. Theory Plebe. It's like Theory. A Plebe is Pleeb. He does some brilliant things as well, so look out for that. And I'll say one more. I don't want to do a whole list, but there's a podcast called Plastic Pills, which is very good. Really good takes on philosophy and politics.
So it was Theory Plebe and Plastic Pills was the last one.
Yeah,
sorry, I was putting them in.
Yeah.
Amazing. I'm looking forward to checking these out, mate. So thank you very much for speaking to us today. I'm going to give another quick shout out to your the book. There's 2 books available from Waterstones and other good shops or some bad on and the bad ones too. But Waterstones is .com/book Meaning of Mark Fisher. I'll put that in the comments again. Get the book here. And when's your next show on your YouTube channel?
I think that will be Thursday, so look out for that. It will be on Twitch as well. We have a Twitch channel also called Theory Wave Nights.
How are you getting on with Twitch, man? I think I've ruined my Twitch channel because in order to build up the YouTube channel a bit more, I ended up just using Twitch and Facebook as a kind of thing to get people on watching it, and then I would just say get the bus to YouTube after 15 minutes, and I think as a result of that my Twitch has kind of died a wee bit.
Twitch is a tough one, yeah. It's a bit of a grind to get people on there. We did get up to 200 followers. It used to be the Acid Left channel. We got 200 followers, but I've been off it for a while, so I came back on, and it's hard to get the audience, to be honest, straight off. But the thing is, I think when you get the audience is I won't say better than YouTube because I'm going to offend people, but there's some good chats that go on in Twitch. It lends itself to that somehow, so I think it's worth trying.
Amazing. Oh, brilliant, man. I'll be tuned into that on the next show, man. Keep up the great work, and thank you very much, man. Everyone, go and get the book, go and get the Meaning of Mark Fisher, and check out the rest of Mike's stuff. All the best, mate. Thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you. Cheers. Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much, mate. That was Dr. Mike Watson, and that was some really good recommendations. I'm going to be checking out those YouTube channels. What we got next on this show, we have tomorrow night. Well, actually, we're not on this weekend, but we will be at this tomorrow night at Time. We've got Joe D'Arc, Dr. Normal, Frank Rafferty, and a whole bunch of Catherine. Yeah, a great lineup tomorrow at Time, which is the Old Fury Murray's at St. Nick's Square. Go to that. A night of cabaret music, poetry, comedy, the full shebang. So that's on Friday night in Glasgow. Then on Saturday night we're going to Gala Shields for the Brooklyn Scotsman's Gala with Jessie Ray, the Honey Farm, Stevie Creed, White Keith, Jackal Trades, Minerva Wakes, Emmy Perez and DJ Beef. And then we're back on Tuesday. You call that radio on your internet. Oh, that was last week. In fact, just have a look at last week. Have a wee look at it. Have you watched these shows yet? Then you should go and check them out. Dominic Hawking talking about A Tribe Called Quest, making Can I Kick It, making hits with E17 and all sorts. Dominic Hawking runs the Mr. Wiggly YouTube channel. We had Peng Shui, an amazing grime punk class war band from London. And then this week we have Brown Bear on Tuesday night, Darren Loki McGarvey Wednesday, and Dominic Diamond on the Thursday. Thank you to everyone tuning in, and especially thank you to Mike for joining us. I hope you have a good evening, have a good weekend, and we will see you soon. Bye!
Yeah, love respecting every aspect of the man like Mark. I love what the man talk on the radio. In case you never know. You call that radio, call that the radio. You call that radio, call that the radio. Come and say, in my name, I'll just go with the flow. In my name, I'll just go with the flow. Cecilia, Mr. Mark, now go bend down low. that radio, radio. Come and say don't you be another man, I'll go lose your head. Say don't you be another man, I'll lose the head. I say radio, radio. Call that a radio, radio. Straight from out of Glasgow, Glasgow. Straight from out of Glasgow, Glasgow. Nice enough on the studio, studio. Come and say any, meeny, my name, I'll just go with the flow. Any, meeny, my name, I'll just go with the flow. Till you miss a mark, now go bend down low. Till you miss a mark, now go bend down low. No radio, radio. You call that the radio, radio. Them man I give you miss a lot of subject, and them I think a man you can't object. So don't you ever come and disrespect. I love and respect in a every aspect.